So thanks for coming. I think this will be a good time. Hopefully we all learn something. There's going to be a couple places where I definitely want everybody to pitch in and give me your views and your opinions. That'll be clear as we go through. So first off, I'd like to sort of talk about who I think we are. And primarily Mike's athletes, but anybody who is in a long-distance coaching athlete relationship, you have to become an athlete coach. So you generally train alone or in a small group. You don't have a lot of hands-on guidance. You have to learn things yourself. And one of the things you have to be able to do is detach from events as they happen, remove the emotional component, and analyze and record data and learn. And that's key. So you acknowledge the emotional response as a fact, and there are many ways we do that. I do it in my blog, and that's a great tool for me. I just vent, and then it's done, and you move on, okay? We have to continually gather data, and we have to continually analyze that data and look for opportunities to grow. So the opportunities are sometimes difficult to find, but I think in a lot of cases we overlook opportunities that are staring us in the face. First of all, maximizing your potential as an athlete, or anybody's potential as an athlete, is a long-term process. It's not something that happens in 6 months or a year. It's something that happens in 5, 10, 15 years. So there's no reason to worry about temporary setbacks. There's no reason to get all freaked out by, hey, I have to take 5 weeks off, or I've got an injury that compels me to change my training for 6 months. That doesn't matter in the long run. And just like anything else in life, if you take a longer path, you have more opportunities to learn. So instead of viewing a layoff or an injury as bad, why not view it as an opportunity to learn something new? Because it really is. It's an opportunity. So you can't change the fact that you've been injured. You can't change the fact that life has gotten in the way of your training. That's done. It's a done deal. So you can either mope about it, you can be pissed off about it, which doesn't do anything for you, or you can treat it as an opportunity, and you can learn from it, and you can move forward. And learning now invests in your future growth. So that's one of the things that's key, is you have to look at the big picture and not just at the current state. So you might have to sacrifice a competition. You're getting ready to compete in 2 weeks, you pull a muscle, you can't compete. Okay, but by investing in treating that as an opportunity and learning, you're going to set the stage for future success a year or 2 years from now and be in a better position to succeed. And a quote that I just stole from Mike that I think was perfect, and it just came out I think yesterday during lunch, is life's hard, but it's harder if you're stupid. So, as athlete coaches, we need to leverage our intelligence and our observations and our perceptions. Belief is a huge part of that. So our attitude, our belief towards an injury, towards a setback, determines a lot of how we move forward. One of the things we got to do on this trip is we were at the Institute of Sport down in Canberra, and it's an incredible place. This is, like a university campus, except it's devoted to sport and sport research. So I was talking with the director of the physio lab, and he said that for years, scientists felt that there was something genetic about non-responders, that there was a hard-coded genetic, hey, these guys aren't going to respond, there's nothing we can do about it. We give them the same training program, we give them the same nutrition, and they just don't respond. It's genetic. But science has started to learn that there's a whole host of variables that are not obvious, but need to be managed in order for the non-responder to become a responder. And for example, the endocrine system, the digestive system. You might have somebody who can't properly digest protein, and that's going to impact their ability to gain muscle. That's going to impact their ability to recover. You might have somebody who sleeps for 8 hours a night, but isn't getting quality sleep. So not only is amount of sleep important, but quality of sleep is important. Stress is huge. But then he said something that was really interesting. He said, belief can trump a lot of that. And he gave an example that's actually been written up in a medical journal called Lancet, which is a well-respected, peer-reviewed, one of the best journals. But this lady was feeling sick. She went to a doctor. She got a diagnosis of a very rare cancer and was told that she had between 6 and 12 months to live. Incurable, nothing can be done. And, you know, obviously she's bummed out. She got a second, third, and fourth opinion. And all the doctors agreed. Sorry, 6 to 12 months, you have this cancer, you're going to die. And she continued to experience worsening health. And a year from the original diagnosis, give or take, she died. They performed an autopsy, and guess what? She didn't have cancer. She believed herself to death. Belief is the huge trump card that we can play to overcome a lot of mismanaged variables. But it's one of those that science can't wrap its quantification tools around. Belief is a very sort of non-quantifiable thing. So it's up to each of us to learn how to apply belief and to continue to practice that. So one of the questions that I want to ask is, what variables are you mismanaging in your life? So for me, I tend to mismanage sleep. You know, I'll go through periods where I do pretty good. I'll get 8 hours of sleep a night. But then I'll go through periods where there's so much I want to do in my life that I find myself only getting 5 hours. And then my training slips. And I have to take a step back and say, okay, you know, something has to give here. I have to find a way to work with that. But Julian, what variables are you mismanaging? So I think you see, we have a range of experience. We've just heard from world-class powerlifters that there's variables they're mismanaging. So all of us mismanage variables in our training. All of us mismanage something that we could do better at to get better results from our training. So it's not a judgment, it's not being negative. Again, it's detaching from that fact and analyzing it and then putting together a plan to attack those, prioritize, and figure out what you need to do better to manage those variables. And it's an ongoing process. It doesn't just stop. You don't reach a point in life where suddenly every variable is miraculously managed and, you know, your training is 100% on track all the time. That just never happens. So don't feel bad. Don't feel like you're not doing your job. If you identify variables that need to be better managed, that is your job, to identify those variables. You shouldn't be upset because of that. Detach, analyze, plan, develop a long-term strategy. And that's the key for dealing with that. And those variables that are being mismanaged provide you with opportunities to do better. So for me, I'm going to talk a little bit about belief now and a little bit about my story, and Mike hinted at it, but I started back into training in 2005, 2006, and I was diagnosed relatively quickly with this disease. And basically all my connective tissues turn into bone. So when I was diagnosed, my thoracic spine from T10 to T12 was already immobile. My anterior spinal ligaments have turned to bone. So that means I can't really pull my shoulders back very well. So that impacts benching. I can't bench. That impacts overhead pressing. For strongman, that impacts stones. That impacts anything where you need thoracic extension. One of the side effects of the disease is that the spine weakens and becomes brittle. So the standard doctor's course of advice is, okay, you can't do anything because you might fracture your spine. So here I am. I'm given between 5 and 10 years before I'm immobile, and I'm told, you need to be immobile because you're going to be immobile someday. I'm like, what? Wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. You know, there's no cure for the disease. Nobody knows how it progresses. So everything's just a guess. So I said, well, if everything's just a guess, then I'm going to take my guess. And screw it, I'm maxing out. I'm going to go for strongman. You know. And everybody said, there's no way you can do that. It's like, well, why not? You know, so yeah, it's taken me longer. So sure, on stones, I have no thoracic extension. So, you know, particularly going from a 46-inch load up to a 52-inch load for me is very hard because I can't get my upper body to move the right way. But you find a technique to work around that. And one of the issues that came up for me is through this additional bone formation, I have a lot of nerve impingement in my lower back, and I don't have great control of my legs, and the muscles never really relax. The nerves are impinged all the time, and my muscles are in a constant state of contraction. So the only time I'll get relief is like when a calf detaches from the Achilles. And it's like, oh, thank God, finally. What? Wait a minute, you know, I just detached a calf. So there's a fine balance, and I've had a lot of muscle tears because of this. So you have to just deal with that. That's just something that happens, and you work around. But for me, that's been great because I've learned a lot about rehab. I mean, now I'm sitting up front and I'm talking to you about rehab. So that's opened up a huge opportunity for me. In many ways, getting diagnosed with this disease was a blessing. It's really spurred me on to take my training more seriously, to work harder, to not slack off, and to learn more and apply myself harder. So just because you have an injury or a setback or stress or something get in the way of training doesn't make it a roadblock. It might make it a speed bump. You might slow down, but again, view it as an opportunity to learn. View it as an opportunity to grow as an individual and find ways to work with that. You know, I could cry about my disease, I could cry about my diagnosis, but you know what? Still have it. 5 years from now, I'm still going to end up in the same place. The only difference is I'm going to spend 5 years crying and being depressed versus spending 5 years doing strongman. So, which is better? You know, so belief is a great thing. If you can apply belief and you can continue to apply belief in yourself and be positive and work through these hurdles, even as you identify them, you're going to succeed in your career as a lifter. Whether it's powerlifting, whether it's strongman, whether it's bodybuilding, doesn't matter. Belief. Obviously, one of the things I've learned a lot about in the trenches is pain, because I'm confronted with pain on a daily basis. So right now I'm dealing with a nerve impingement that's causing my adductor, my sartorius, my hamstring, and my gastroc to be in a perpetual contraction, and it's causing my knee to mistrack, and it hurts all the time, and there's nothing I can do about it. I mean, I can take drugs and get some relief, but it's just there. So pain is an interesting thing. Pain carries a lot of emotional aversion, and we're programmed that way as a species. We have succeeded as a species because of our pain response. In large part, pain is one of the most important sensations that we can have. And we have to respect that. We have to learn from that. So the better you are attuned to pain, the better the individual is, the better the species will survive. Natural selection favors those who have pain, who understand pain, and abide by pain. So you have this strong emotional response, this strong aversion to pain. Acute pain signals injury, it signals infection. Chronic pain signals a decreased lifespan. So all of those things are programmed in us to say, okay, pain's bad, pain's bad. And the body and mind will do everything it can to shield us from pain. And we sort of interpret pain in a funny way as lifters. And the question that I'll ask is, are we properly managing pain? It's an important environmental variable, probably one of the most important. And if we want to kick on the fan if we're getting too hot. Okay. So there's a tendency in our sports to say, no pain, no gain, and to man up and ignore the pain or work through it. And that doesn't really work. It's better than the answer of stop training, but it's still not very good because you're ignoring an important environmental variable. So we need to find a way to detach the emotional response, treat pain as a variable, analyze it, work with it, track it, gather data, understand it, plan, strategize, just like any other environmental variable that comes up. So I was reading somebody's training log on the forum today. Actually, I was reading 2 training logs. One of them, somebody said, I think, what was it? They had an operation and they're going to be down for 5 weeks and they don't know what they're going to do. Life sucks. And I made the suggestion, hey, okay, take the time you would normally train, go buy Half's new book on periodization, or go buy Super Training, and take that 5 hours a week you would spend in the gym and devote yourself to becoming a student of the sport. It's that simple. You have an opportunity now. You have time that you would normally spend in the gym. You can't, but that doesn't mean you can't grow in our sport. Or find a way to work with your powerlifting federation. USAPL, I'm sure, Matt, doesn't USAPL need volunteers to do things? Absolutely. Yeah, so there's another way that you can become more involved with your sport and make a difference. There's all sorts of things you can do that are not bound by physical training. So if you get some downtime, don't view it as the end of the world. View it as an opportunity. Pain brings stress. And if you sort of just try to ignore pain, the stress is still there. You have to find a way to manage that stress down, just like work stress, just like time stress, just like stress from too much IT, just like stress from not enough sleep. You have to find a way to deal with that stress. So again, gather data, plan, develop a strategy, keep the long-term picture in mind, but learn from your pain. Don't just try to ignore it and, man through it, because that's not going to work. Your stress is still there, your pain's still there. You're just hoping that somehow, magically, everything corrects itself. And it won't. There's no magic, unfortunately. So, and one of the things we have in motorcycle racing, I used to road race out at Willow Springs in California, is sometimes you have to ease off the throttle to go faster. So you'll get a lot of beginners who think that, hey, if I keep that throttle wide open, I'm going to go faster than everybody else. They're usually the ones who wreck the most. And they're usually the ones who are buying new bikes. Because they come into a corner too hot. They don't realize proper setup. They don't have a long-term strategy for dealing with the track. So in dealing with the track, you set up markers for yourself. And you have little observation points where you say, okay, when I come to this marker, I better be off the throttle and I better be on the brake, or else I'm going to be too hot in this corner and I'm going to lose it. And you plan your approach. You don't just blindly go in, because chances are you're going to wreck. So training's the same way. Sometimes you have to ease off that throttle, put your plan together, revise your plan, and then you'll enjoy better success down the road. And I think Mike was talking about, and I'm not a powerlifting guy, I'm sorry, I'm a strongman, so if I get names wrong, bear with me. But Mike was talking about Dietmar Wolf, is it? And there was one of his lifters who was like within 10 kilos of a gold. Yeah, and didn't go for it. And I guess there's a huge, bunch of speculation about, well, why didn't he go for it? It was clearly within his reach, and he could have had a gold at the World Games. Well, the theory is that Dietmar Wolf takes a very long-term approach with his athletes and said at that meet, no, it's not worth it. We're going to keep you in check. We're going to keep that throttle eased off so that you enjoy a bigger success a year from now. Now, that might not be true. That's speculation, because nobody knows for sure except Dietmar Wolf and his athlete. But that's one interpretation that makes a lot of sense. So you'll go through a risk-reward calculation for every injury, for every tweak, for every meet. But if you have a world game on the line and you can do well, you might push through your injury and you might ignore the pain for a week in order to reap the benefits of competing at Worlds and doing well. But if you have a local meet and you have that same injury, you might say, hey, you know what? That local meet doesn't really matter. I don't need another plastic trophy. I'm not even going to bother going to the meet. Or I'm really going to keep it dialed down and I'm only going to go to 80% or 70%. Or I'm going to just take tokens on my bench because of the shoulder. And I'm going to just pull and I'm going to squat. But you keep the long-term picture in mind, and it's long-term success that drives this game and makes you a winner. So developing the plan, developing tracking analysis, and some way to measure progress is important. And in RTS land, you know that means a couple things. It's going to mean autoregulation, and it's going to mean block periodization. I mean, that's what RTS brings to the table as sort of core fundamental principles more than anything else. So, how can we incorporate autoregulation and block periodization into our management of pain? Well, injury leads to pain. Pain can become the new autoregulatory governor. And by that I mean, we normally talk about autoregulation in terms of reps left in the tank. You know, and we say an RPE of 9 means we have 1 rep left in the tank for sure. An RPE of 10 means we have no reps left in the tank. And we use that RPE scale and we talk about reps left. We also have other ones. You know, we talk about, or at least I talk about heart rate, respiratory distress. Like my favorite for strongman events is, okay, it's a 10 when I finished my medley and I have to go lay in the garage under the squat rack with the fan turned on for 15 minutes. You know, okay, that was a 10. That level of respiratory distress. But when you're injured, pain becomes the one you have to listen to. Pain becomes the king and the queen. So, as an exercise outside of today's lecture, think of other environmental variables that can form the basis for autoregulation. But there's a whole bunch. Form, technique. I was talking to somebody, Scott, wasn't it you? You said you have 2 RPEs for deadlift. What are they again?
Max lift, and grip knot.
Yeah, and why do you do that? Yeah, so, yeah. So Scott's identified an issue with his training, and Scott's a world level powerlifter, okay? So, you know, Scott's identified something that's holding him back, and he's addressing it. So he's addressed grip as a variable that he's going to manage, and he's going to track and use that in autoregulation. So we can find these everywhere and apply them in our training. There's a whole bunch in strongman. You know, height of the loading platform, time. There's just a whole bunch in strongman to control. So, and Half's most recent book on periodization identifies 4 goals in block periodization. You develop the athlete over time. We've already mentioned that. You want to avoid overtraining. You're going to try to maximize performance at predetermined intervals. So as you're setting out your annual plan or your biannual plan, you're going to say, I want to do these meets. And I want my performance to be the best at these meets. So you're identifying specific times when you want the body to peak. You want to maximize the adaptations and performance with structured training interventions. And that essentially is saying we want to control all the environmental variables. So the quote in red is straight from Half's book, and it's, you know, periodization should be defined as the logical and systematic sequencing of multiple training factors, its variables, in an integrative fashion to optimize specific physiological and performance outcomes at predetermined points. So all that's saying is we want to identify all the variables associated with the athletic process. We want to control them. We want to adopt a plan for dealing with them so that we maximize the athlete's potential at the times the athlete wants his potential to be the best. I tossed in a chart. Again, I stole it from half. But I guess if I cite somebody, I'm not really stealing it. So this sort of just is a great reminder. And if anybody wants a copy of this presentation, just send me your email address and let me know, and I'll email you this. But this is a great little summary of some of the terms that get tossed around in block periodization. Now, it differs from the way Mike uses some of these terms. So, we'll talk about an accumulation mesocycle. That's sort of the standard block periodization. Mike will talk about a developmental mesocycle. And they occur at the same time in the structured macrocycle. Mike's emphasis is more on identifying the weaknesses in a lift and helping you with specific exercises set the foundation for improving that lift later on in the cycle. So, we might have learned in the last cycle that we did that, hey, I've got a problem on the initial ascent out of the hole on my squat. So that means I have to work on a specific range, and there's specific ways to address that. The developmental block is a great place to do that. And then we turn, as we get further into our training cycle, we drop that work at the individual weakness level, and we focus more on the competition lift. We get more specific, which makes Dr. Z happy. So, what's the impact of injury and injury analysis? And gosh, we're running out of time. A proactive strategy is evident at the annual planning level and pushes down. And this is great for dealing with, okay, I'm feeling burned out, or I know there's going to be a period of high stress with work or with life. So I'm going to program in some structured downtime. I'm going to program in a 2-week or a 4-week block of very light work or minimal work in my training. Instead of trying to go 100% all year long, I'm going to take some structured time, and it's called a transition mesocycle. And if you go back to some of the writings of Tudor Bompa, he actually suggests that after every peaking phase, you take a transition of 2 to 4 weeks and recover a little bit. So planning this and planning some structured recovery time is good. And I think Mike will finally agree with that. I think Mike did it for the first time this year. So, reactive strategies happen at the moment. So we have an injury that crops up during a training session. I pull a hamstring. Okay, that's something that wasn't in the plan. Now it is. And, that pushes up, and that impacts my training for the rest of the year or for the next 6 months or whatever. But so we start at a very small focus, and it pushes up rather than starting at a broad focus and pushing down. So we've talked a little bit about the proactive strategies. I guess my question about all this is, the traditional block periodization gurus, Tudor Bompa and others, talk about the transition blocks, the rehab blocks occurring in response to training events. But training is often not the source of the most stress. We all just talked about stress, and none of us said that training was the source of the stress. We all identified other factors that were getting in the way. So wouldn't it make sense to structure our training around those other factors? And yeah, I think it definitely does. Again, if you're coming up on, a thesis defense, you know, take some time off. Don't try to do everything. Yeah. And is there a way we could make this a little bit auto-regulatory? Is there a way over time we could track all these variables? And that's one of the things that Mike and I are hoping to gain with the new platform we're developing. We're hoping that by taking a longer-term analytical look at a lot of different data, that we can start to identify some of the different patterns that impact training and start to do better at managing long-term patterns and get some auto-regulation introduced. Reactive strategy, again, injury occurs, what do? Well, you can't just say, let's man up and continue forward. We're going to try to understand what the injury means, remove the emotional response, analyze it, track some data, and approach it rationally. So rehab work can be integrated into existing blocks. The scope and severity of the injury defines what we can do. If we have a pulled hamstring or torn hamstring, obviously lower body work is to some degree removed from our program. And to the degree it's removed from the program, we might become bench specialists for a few months. But that's okay. We focus on something we can grow, something we can get better at. And, you know, I did that. I pulled a hamstring in August of 2012. I had a terrible incline log press. Well, okay, that was the perfect opportunity. I worked my butt off on incline log press, and I was finally able to break the 300-pound barrier, you know, for the first time ever. So there was an opportunity that presented itself, and I took advantage of it. And that's what you have to do. You have to identify ways that you can take advantage of what's being presented. This is hard, developing your own pain RPE chart. Anytime we talk about sensory input, direct sensory input, it becomes very difficult to generalize. And I know this slide's hard to see. But you know, we might talk about the way pain comes on. So the second bullet point there, or the second sub-bullet point, pain from 0 to holy shit, you know, before you have a chance to think about it, that means it's pretty bad. That means that, you know, something is pretty seriously wrong. And I think we all know what that means. It just comes on all of a sudden, and it, you know, it's like, okay, that wasn't good. And there's other pain that you experience where you can, I'm going to call it dancing around the edge, where you can move into it a little bit and you feel those nerves start to light up a little bit. You can move a little more, whether it's endorphin release, whether it's the muscle relaxing. So there's different degrees of pain, and we all need to start developing our own RPE charts and assigning some RPE numbers to those. And it's not something that, unfortunately, you know, I can do for you or Mike can do for you. We have to do that for ourselves. And then you respect that. So you say, okay, if a 10 is pain from 0 to holy shit, you know, in the blink of an eye. Okay, if I encounter that in my training after a hamstring tear, then I'm done. I'm shutting it down for the day. And you might note in your training log that during week 1, week 2, week 3, you know, you were only able to do a very little bit before you hit that RPE of 10. But then you might note that by week 4, you were able to do a lot more. So you see some progress. And identifying progress is huge, because now we see that healing is taking place. We see that rehab is working. Okay? So, does anybody have any ideas about other sensory cues for pain? I mean, this is very much an open topic.